Hello, welcome to Think Design Work Smart. I have with me Liz Keogh, and we're gonna have some interesting topics to discuss about. Something around BDD and Canavin and complexity and all sorts of interesting things. So, hi Liz, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I'm happy to have this discussion with you. So let's get right into it. At the beginning, I'm very interested in the history of BDD because I kind of know it, but I know that many people don't. So I'd like to
Yeah.
distribute these a bit more. So how did it start? When did it start? Why did you do that?
So Dan North started it. He's written his own blog posts around what he remembers and where the origins of it came. I'll tell my story because it's how I came across it. I joined ThoughtWorks at the end of 2004, and a week after I joined, they had an away day at the weekend, and I went to the away day, and Dan was presenting this tool called JBehave. And he was talking about neurolinguistic programming and how words can affect the way you think about things, and that the word should was more powerful than the word test. And JBehave back then, the way he presented it, it was a replacement for JUnit. So it was only unit testing.
Mhm.
I was writing a Tetris game at the time in Java, and I saw it and I thought, this is such a great tool. Looks amazing. And so I tried to plug it in place of JUnit, and it didn't compile. So I wrote him an email with the changes that made it compile. And then I tried to run it and it didn't run. So I wrote him another email with a bug fix and then another email with a bug fix. And he said, he sent me an email back saying, Liz, I've made you a committer. Please learn how to use patches, because I'd just been sending him code in the body of the email. I've been in industry 7 years, but I haven't learnt half enough. I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to learn how to use version control properly, how to use patches, how to send me, and it was all Subversion then. Git didn't exist. In fact, Subversion was quite new. So we started with this tool JBehave, and Chris Matt was around at the time, and they were having these conversations around the scenarios that little examples that Dan was putting together and how they applied to whole systems. And Chris said, this is just how I do analysis. You've got some behavior and you want some outcome. And they were talking about that. Chris said, but your behavior only happens in a particular context. So Chris was the person who put the given in given when then. And with that given when then, we started making this framework, which it had these classes which output English when you ran them. So every step had to be a custom built Java class. And nobody ever used it. I tried to use it once. I did the empty scenarios for the game of life, just the basic rules. It took me 2 hours to knock out the empty scenarios with no code, nothing running, just everything empty and passing. 2 hours just to get the scenarios up. And I said, this is too clunky. Nobody used it. So we kind of abandoned it for a bit. And then I saw a blog post by Dave Kalinsky, and he was talking about how he had taken the Ruby version, and in Ruby, strings are really easy. You can make function names can be strings. So instead of outputting camel case converted into English, you could just output strings. And if you're going to do that, you might as well just use text and read the text in and use regex to match it to steps at the back end. And I know regex, so I thought I could do that in Java. So round about the same time that this RSpec story runner was turning into plain English. It was basically a port of JBehave, but it was turning into English and then eventually became Cucumber. I was rewriting JBehave 1 as the core of JBehave 2. And that's resulted in the English language tools that we know today, Cucumber, the current version of JBehave, SpecFlow, all the others.
So the idea is that it was a mix between analysis and programming.
Exactly. It's helped us have conversation with analysts. Sorry. We also always had great conversations with testers as well. So one of the things that we found was that testers would spot the scenarios other people would miss. And this is where this concept of the Three Amigos comes from. You want somebody who has a problem or understands the problem. You want somebody who's going to solve the problem, and then somebody who's going to spot the things you didn't spot. So somebody with that tester mindset. So I still value my testers hugely.
Would you think that now you'd apply BDD in the same way, or what did you grow in? How did you grow in understanding with BDD?
So a couple of things. One was that we realised people kept focusing on the tools and not the conversations.
Mm.
So the emphasis on conversations, we emphasise it all the time. People do not have enough conversations. I'm mostly programming for fun these days. I still have conversations with a rubber duck or a teddy bear or an imaginary pixie. You know, I try to imagine that I am talking to somebody, because getting that language as far as you can into the code base is just super. The other thing that's happened was Dan and I were due to do a talk together at Skills Matter. And we met up in a cafe beforehand. And Dan said to me, you know, before we start this, there's something I've discovered that I really, we need to tell you. And I said, stop them automating scenarios as well. And he said, yes. And it turned out that people were automating far, far too soon, while things were still in flux. At the same time, I was going to Lean conferences and talking a lot with David J. Anderson. And David J. Anderson brought Dave Snowden in to do a couple of keynotes, and he taught me the Knevin framework. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, it suddenly made me realize that the complexity is always in the new stuff. And your new stuff is going to be in flux until you gain understanding on it. And that automating over that new stuff is just pointless. You can have conversations around it and write the conversations down because they're really lightweight. Conversations are just the most lightweight thing. It's a great way of modeling what you're about to produce so that you've got what we call coherence, a realistic reason of thinking that this is a good idea. But then you need to actually try it out and prototype it, spike it. And you don't automate prototypes and spikes. So that was the really big discovery for me. I did a talk called 10 Years of Doing BDD All Wrong. And I talked about some of the things we had done wrong teaching BDD, applying it to absolutely everything. Starting with, we used login as an example. You don't learn anything from having conversations around login, you know, wrong password, right password, username. Everybody knows how that works. So it was really, really hard to showcase the value of BDD when we were starting with these utterly simple scenarios. And then, of course, everybody started with login instead of starting with the thing that was most important. You know, pretend you've already got somebody logged in. Given you're logged in, then what happens? Why are you logged in? What are you logged in for? So getting people to focus on those new risky bits instead of all the mistakes we made in those 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's a typical mistake, right? To start with the logical flow of the application and not with the most risky parts. And maybe you also need a bit of analysis experience or life experience to know that that's not how you need to do it. That's what I see typically at my clients. That's what they try to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've these days I ask, well, okay, what are you going to be able to do with this that you couldn't do before? Right? When this goes live, what are you going to be able to do? Your customer's going to be able to do. Another system will be able to do something. Somebody will be able to do something they couldn't do. What's that thing? And I use this little scale, 5 to 1. You know, 5 is nobody in the world's ever done this before. 4 is somebody in the world's done it, but not here. And there's always a 5 or 4. There's always something new that you're doing that's never been done before.
Yeah.
When you find that, that's the risk bit. So start with that. And if you've got a project with multiple ones of those, see if you can just carve one off and get the prototype for that out, because it might not work.
So we're already talking about risk management. So you're talking that you're using BDD as a risk management tool as well.
Yeah, so I talk about capabilities a lot when I'm doing BDD, and there's a little thing I've got called Capability Red. It's a lot like impact mapping. So if we start there with that high level planning, capabilities often have a one-to-one mapping with epics. You probably call them epics. When you think about it, they're actually capabilities or capabilities within some context, which gives you the when and the given. You know, the capability is the thing you're doing, and the given is the context in which you start. And then you've got some outcome that you want as a result of being able to do that thing. So there's a really natural derivation from capabilities down to scenarios. And I just find it's really simple and elegant and very beautiful.
Where do you think you'd apply now BDD compared to your understanding in the beginning, in the first years?
Conversations. Every time somebody is telling me something and I don't quite understand, I ask, can you give me an example? I had somebody from a PMO office came to one of my BDD trainings. They said, it's very nice, I kind of get it, but it's obviously not relevant to me because I don't do software. And they came up to me very excited the next day. They said, you won't guess what happened. I was talking to somebody, they said something, I said, can you give me an example? And then everybody understood so much better. And we started spotting all the examples they'd missed. So you can use this with all kinds of process and all kinds of behavior. I did a talk called BDD for Life, where I used the examples as positive visualization of well-formed outcomes, pretending that you've achieved the thing you want to achieve. So I'm using BDD as a coaching technique to get people to look at an example of what it might look like if they actually do that thing, and to then start closing the gap.
So I saw that example mapping is more and more present now as a technique in the world of people who do BDD or teach BDD, and but I still don't think it's present enough. Like mapping your examples, even more like, okay, questions, that's a tool, that's a technique, but what do you feel about example mapping?
So I don't use it that much. I have seen it done. I know some people really value it. I think the place for it is when you've got lots of complicated business rules.
Yeah.
You've got some process that somebody understands. So it's really useful for what I call the threes. Somebody in the organization's done it, or we've got access to expertise in a different way. There's a known predictable outcome, but it's hard to understand and it takes some time. And I think example mapping is crucial for that. I guess because I'm coding for fun, pretty much everything I'm coding is either something I understand or something that's completely new, and I don't get a lot of chance to talk to people about their expertise. When I do, I tend to use examples. I don't use the formal example mapping process. It feels to me a lot like the story template does these days. The as AI wants so that, or you can use Chris's version in order to I want, as AI want. It's training wheels. It's intended to help people understand the process, which once you get through it and you've done it enough times, I doubt they'll need the post-its. I doubt they'll need to do the explicit mapping. It'll just come naturally. So
for people, it's a good step to start with that, but after that, try to understand and diversify your tooling.
Yeah, I think it's okay to skip it when you feel confident enough to do so. And just go straight for the scenarios. But I do think one of the things that I do find is people do sometimes get confused about the given and the when, and where the context ends and the event starts. I definitely think it could help with that.
Where would you think that BDD is not applicable as you see it now?
The new stuff and the really boring stuff.
Well,
the new stuff, because you only want a couple of examples just to get that coherence, and then you want to get it working. You don't want to be spotting all the ones you've missed. That's not what it's for. The really boring stuff, there's a pattern that Dan calls ginger cake. It's exactly like the chocolate cake you already made, except with ginger instead of chocolate. Just focus on the ginger and you'll be fine. So when you're doing something that's really well understood, really boring, what I found is it's enough just to name the titles of the scenarios, the one where we create a user, the one where we delete a user, the one where we update a user. And you can ask, is there anything different about those? No, so great, get it done.
So it's just overhead if it's really boring.
Yeah. So being pragmatic about it, being really pragmatic. So we talked about the 5s, the 4s, and the 3s. 5, no one in the world's ever done this before. 4, somebody in the world's done it, not here. Those are both complex. Even if somebody has done it, they won't have done it in this context. So in our organisation, we don't know whether we can do it. 3, somebody in the org's done it, or we've got access to expertise. The 2s and 1s, somebody in the team's done it, or we all know how to do it. Those are boring. Write down the titles, get it done. You're probably going to get it right, or if you get it wrong, it's going to be so obviously wrong because it's so well understood that you'll just go fix it. So it doesn't need the same level of analysis.
So it's I think the case where you just make a whiteboard drawing with everyone, so you have the common understanding, and then you start working. That's with 1 and 2.
Yeah. So normally I've seen people do feature kickoffs. And when you're dealing with a whole new feature, there are going to be some parts of it which are new and some parts of it which are well understood, because you're never providing the same capability to an organization or to its customers they already have. It's always going to have some part of it new. So identifying which bits are new and which bits are well understood can really help you shortcut the whole Three Amigos, conversations, planning meetings, etc. I helped one client, they were having 4-hour planning meetings every 2 weeks. And just that technique of working out what's new, what's well understood, what's in the middle, that we actually should have conversations about. What are we just going to try out? And what have we gained understanding on? Because the 5s and 4s become 3s.
Did it ever happen to you that people have thought that something is easy for them, or they know about it, and after that, while doing it, they understood it's a lot more complex? So rating it as a 3 or 2, and then understanding that it's a 4.
Usually, I say, "Have you ever done it before?" And they go, "No." I go, "Okay, well then it's not a 3." This is the thing; it's kind of inarguable. I have had people think something is a 3. But you go, have you ever done it before in this organization? Do you know what systems are available to support you? Do you know whether you're going to be able to get this through security? Do you know whether you're going to be able to ship this? Will ops be okay with it? Do you know you've got people who can actually help you stabilize it and make it into something? Because you want 3s to be super stable. You want 3s to be well tested. You want them to be automated. And the 5s and 4s become 3s. So you do a spike, then you stabilize it. When you start looking at, have you done all these things before? They'll go, yeah, no. Okay, it's a 4 then. We know it's been done somewhere else, and maybe we did it somewhere else. But unless our context is really, really similar, it's going to be a 5 or a 4.
Yeah,
I do sometimes have people who are coming in as experts, and they do sometimes turn a 4 into a 2. They've come in from another organization. The organization they're coming into is really, really similar. Bang, suddenly it's super cheap, and you've massively lowered the risk. It was David Jansen told me you can just poach somebody and turn a 4 into a 2.
So we're already into discussing about complexity, because everything that we're talking now, it's about minimizing or understanding complexity. So all these tools are about this. So maybe we can go a bit deeper into this and your work on complexity. What are you working now around these topics? Because I know that you're doing a lot of stuff.
Well, I'm super excited by it. So I've been studying Cynefin framework since 2012. For anyone who doesn't know, very, very quick overview, it talks about different domains of predictability and how to handle those situations in those domains. So obvious situations a child can solve, you can categorize a problem. So one of those, easy to solve. Complicated things, and complicated and complex are synonyms in English, but not when we talk about complexity thinking. So complicated things are predictable. They rely on expertise. They can be analysed. The complex stuff that we've been talking about, it tends to be new, tends to be highly innovative, not very well understood. And we tend to get emergence and emergent outcomes from it. So the trick is to try things out which are safe to fail. And then you've got chaos, which is it's transient domain, resolves itself very quickly, not necessarily in your favour. So you have to act really quickly. And it's not safe to fail. If you can make it safe to fail, this isn't chaotic. The complex domain is also a very human domain. So we tend to behave in complex ways, and we get these emergent cultural outcomes as well. So while I'm using it to talk about requirements and where the complexity is in requirements, there's also a ton of stuff around human systems, and the fact that the examples that we come up with, the patterns that we spot, are only some of the patterns that might happen. So as well as the stuff that's relevant to BDD, there's also this hugely deep rabbit hole of anthropology and sociology and knowledge management and all the stuff that Dave talked about. And I'm still learning it. I came back from the masterclass with Dave Snowden in December with 12 very dense pages of notes, and I've been studying this thing for 7 years. It just gets deeper and deeper. So I'm currently hugely fascinated by the way that people behave in groups, some of the heuristics we use to shortcut decision making and how those heuristics can lead us to the wrong ideas. Dave is using the word heuristics instead of bias these days, because mostly they're actually really useful. We wouldn't be able to move forward in the world without them.
Yeah.
But it's a very human problem, very human problem. Human beings tend to crave predictability. So that central domain in Cynefin, disorder, is a domain where we don't know which of those dominates. So we behave according to our preferred domain. And that usually means treating something complex as if it's complicated, treating something new as if we can predict what's going to happen.
Related to these ideas of complexity, I saw that you started, well, a few years back, writing about this connection in software development and Cynefin, and a bit about BDD and complexity. So what do you think is the biggest challenge now in software organizations in this big topic of complexity, scaling? We saw that scaling starts being more and more a topic, like agile scaling, digital transformation,
Scaling.
lean, whatever.
I'm actually about to write a blog post. It's in the back of my head at the moment, called Strategy is Leading That Which is Spread Out. So the biggest challenge is that desire to understand complex situations and to analyze them. And we do that across large organizations by aggregating data and coming up with a single number and having net promoter score. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's a reason why you're all spread out. And you need to be spread out for the things you're trying to achieve. So as soon as you try and gain control of that and try and gain understanding of it, you instantly lose a huge amount of the value of being spread out in the first place. Dave's got a lot more knowledge of how to handle that than I do, but he does talk a lot about finely grained objects, which basically means the people and their stories. What you want to do is get to the people and get their stories from them. And he's got some software which does that very, very effectively. You can use paper versions of that software, or you can just go talk to them. You know, if you don't have that software and you don't have time to do the paper versions, going and talking to people, there's a technique called Gemba in Lean. It means the place, I believe, the going to the place or something like that. But it's basically the technique of, as a leader, going and talking to the people on the ground, because they're the ones who really know what's going on and they can tell you. It's not enough to aggregate that stuff. And Dave talks about the need to have mavericks and outliers if you want to progress and survive as an organization. You've got to have people who want to do the crazy new things. And not stifle them and embrace them and allow them to try things out and fail, because otherwise you only ever do what's been done before.
Yeah, but in the same time, there are people who crave doing the same thing all over, and it's fine. That's fine as well, right? To some extent.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so Simon Wardley talks about pioneers, settlers, and town planners. Pioneers being the people who do really like doing the new stuff. Settlers being the people who like to stabilize the pioneered land and make it nice and rich for people to actually work with. And then your town planners are your architects, you know, your enterprise architects, interested in the big scale systems and do we go with Google Cloud or AWS and questions like that, you know. So I'm a settler. I really love taking somebody else's hacky spike and stabilizing it and putting it under test. I'm less good at prototyping and coming up with brilliant ideas. I've seen some pioneers who are absolutely joyously brilliant at coming up with ideas, but heaven help you if you actually put that code in production. You know, it's not going to work. Yeah. It's just not stable.
So you need a mix of all of them depending on when this happens.
Exactly. So this is the cultural thing. But when you've got, so one of the things I find is I'm working with startups, they tend to be pioneer heavy. And then when they start getting bigger and bigger, and now they've got a stable product, they're still hiring pioneers because culturally they're all pioneers, and it doesn't work. So I'm experimenting with how to get those different kinds of people into an organization so that you can have some people doing innovative R&D stuff and coming up with the new things, and some people then actually making real products out of those new things that work. because it does take two different kinds of people for that to happen. It's like testers and devs. You can be okay at one and brilliant at the other, but I've not found anyone who's brilliant at both.
I think there's a lot of energy in people who create stuff, like the people from startups. They're crazy with trying out and having ideas, staying all night to try something and so on. But then that doesn't that bring a bit of chaos as well if you go back to Cynefin, or at least they don't look at complexity, to say the least. So sometimes when I work with startups, I see that they try to do things. It kind of works, but it's so much unnecessary complexity in all of the results that it's very difficult to tackle after that. And someone needs to come and minimize that unnecessary complexity to have it
Right.
stable.
So Dave Snowden talks about a dynamic in Cynefin called chaos grazing. So the idea is that you've got this urgency. You're about to run out of money. You've got to get this thing working, or your investors are going to be angry with you, or you need funding in the first place, whatever it is. So you get something, try out massive loads of ideas. This is the chaos, is people working independently, frantically. It's not safe to fail. The organization will die if you don't get it working.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as they've got something working, they stabilize it just enough to move on to the next thing. And this is a really typical startup pattern. And yeah, this is when it's the chaos that's causing people to work the crazy long hours and work at night. I think when you're in a stable organization and you've got that dynamic, that's just poisonous.
Mm-hmm.
It's unnecessary and toxic. The only other time I see chaos in large organizations is when there's an urgent production issue. And I think trying to avoid those urgent production issues is so crucial, and actually making the thing stable. Monzo are better at this than anybody I know. Their blog is so transparent about the problems they encountered and why they happened and what they learned from it and what they're going to do better again the next time. It's really, really excellent stuff. Yes. So working long hours, working weekends, it's not sustainable.
Exactly.
Chaos is transient because it burns out eventually.
Mm-hmm.
It will hit the natural limit.
Do you think you can apply these ideas as well to management? Like there are these theories that you have managers that are very good for stable situations, managers that are good for growing, being innovative, or managers who are very good in crisis mode.
Yeah, absolutely. Winston Churchill, absolutely fantastic when the World War was on, but nobody wanted him around afterwards.
It was boring.
Well, he was really good at crises.
Mm-hmm.
He was really good at managing crises and leading people and getting them galvanized and communicating the urgency and the importance of what they were doing and keeping them aligned on that vision. Mayor Giuliani in New York, he was praised for his response to the 9/11 attacks. He really reacted very well to that. But his behaviour since has been questionable. So, yeah, I think there are people who respond well to different situations. Somebody was talking about Frederick Taylor and Taylorism and said that Taylor's idea was that his techniques would provide the workers on the line with autonomy, not put more layers of management in. And he went to his grave sad and really disappointed at what people had done with his techniques. That kind of behaviour, that kind of fitting, getting people to do the same thing over and over again and minimizing the workflow is really great when you're doing predictable things, when you're putting the same circuit board together over and over and over and over again. These days we automate that, because why would you have people involved in it? Flawed, error-prone people. So we're moving away from this situation where labour and production were the scarce resource. There's a guy called Julian Birkinshaw, London School of Economics. He has this thing called adhocracy. He says bureaucracy, labour and production are the scarce resource. And this is why we automate our tests, because you don't want your really skilled, what about this testers doing boring automate over and over again the same tests when they could be exploring the stuff that we all forgot about. That exploratory testing is what they're superb at. They're also really great at getting environments working, I found. They are absolutely the forefront of DevOps. Just astonishing how really they know the build better than a lot of devs do. So anyway, bureaucracy, labour and production of the scarce resource. When that stops happening and you've got the automation, then the knowledge and experience to make all that stuff work becomes a scarce resource. He says you enter what's called a meritocracy. And this is that knowledge sharing, that expertise. It becomes the most important thing to do. But when the knowledge and experience that you need to make decisions is freely available, Jeff Gothelf talks about analytics on tap, then action and conviction become the scarce resource. And this is where you see organizations who've got those analytics in place, who know whether things are working or not, who can make spikes or prototypes, get it out there, see what's going on, and then stabilize it in just a almost seamless way. They get the right to run adhocracies when they need to. And I don't think adhocracies are actually stable. I think that becoming an adhocracy, the Agile Fluency model touches on it as well, that last zone 4, I remember Diane Larson described it as a bit of a red herring. Hardly anybody gets there. I think they get there, but they don't stay there because they don't need to. It's typified by urgency in the market, urgent opportunities that you're going to jump in. So it's a different kind of chaos.
Do you think that flat organizations are the same? There was this big trend of flattening any organization, not having management. I think now it's not that big anymore, but do you think it's the same? It's just a transient stage?
I think that a flat organization is a symptom of having got this stuff right, not a cause. What I see is lots and lots of people trying to restructure their organization by eliminating layers of hierarchy, but actually they haven't changed the relationships in the organization. They haven't introduced people to other people. They haven't managed to change the real structure as a human one. It doesn't matter what you do with the management if you don't change the way that human beings are relating to each other.
So you need to start with the culture, with the people, with the way they communicate, with the values. And then maybe you have a different way of a different structure of management.
You can't impose values either, and you can't impose culture.
No,
what you can do is you can try different things out and see what changes the culture in a better direction.
Exactly.
So that's pretty much what Dave does most of the time is going. He also talks about social network stimulation a lot, so getting people introduced to other people, with an idea that when you've got people in the organization who know the right people or know someone who knows the right person, then the ability to get your job done becomes super, super easy. And it becomes a much more fluid, flexible organization as a result. You also get to hear the stories more. So instead of leadership going to hear the stories, it's people on the ground hearing the stories from other people on the ground and making decisions about what to do about that. That's really powerful.
I know there was this study a few years back on how different cultures meaning countries in this way, behave in this way of collaborating, who values more collaboration, communication, or structure, or authority, and so on. And it was very interesting that there are obviously some countries that are extremely opposite. Like the Germanic countries, extremely opposite to the Latin countries. I don't know, Germany, Austria, maybe even northern countries, Scandinavia. They are very much focused on authority. Though Scandinavia, not that much. While in Latin countries, like in France, in Spain, in Portugal, and so on, they're very much focused on relationships and networks and solving things in different ways. And it's interesting when I go to big corporations, when you have both of them, management, or I don't know, some projects around cross cultures, they don't get along. So how do you fix these types of situations? Because it's ingrained in their how they are.
I am not a sociologist or an anthropologist. I don't necessarily know all the answers. I do know trying things out is the way forward, trying out different experiments to see what works for people. And different people are going to have different needs and different ways of behaving, and that's okay. That's diversity.
Yeah.
That's important. it isn't always the case that having great relationships is good, because sometimes it's the loners who come up with the crazy ideas. Groups which really relate well to each other can end up in what we call a consensus culture, where you can't shift because everybody has to agree before you do anything, and you don't want to tread on people's toes. You want everybody to be happy. Those cultures don't necessarily result in change. So having the mix, I think, that's really important. It's that mix of culture, that mix of diversity that you want.
I observed this symptom of in some corporations I worked with, of committee-based decision making. So you have 30 people and everybody needs to agree to do something. So of course it takes them at least 9 months to take a decision, even though it's something very simple. So that brings you to be very rigid.
Yeah, I was talking to one organization about how you come up with good ideas. And they said, but we do our best work together. It's like, but how do you come up with the ideas? Because we don't come up with ideas in pairs. We come up with ideas inside our heads and then we express them. And if they get rejected when we express them, we stop expressing them.
So you need this openness of the people around you, and this safe space to be able to say even stupid things, but not be penalized for them.
Yeah. I remember there was a brainstorming session. Some politician came up with some outrageous, crazy idea. And it was a session deliberately designed to come up with ideas. And they had come up with the most outlying idea. And of course, it was completely unpalatable. There was no way anybody was going to do it. But with that anchoring one end of what was possible, you could probably come up with the ideas in between a lot more easily, rather than growing from where you already are. And I think that the way the press treated the fact that this politician come up with this idea was appalling, absolutely appalling. It makes it completely unsafe for people to challenge the status quo. And, it was a session where it should have been safe to fail. It should have been safe to come up with things that you were never going to implement. People are a problem. Amazing, but so much for a problem. So let me talk a little bit about one of the other things I'm quite passionate about, which is Greentech.
Okay.
We are seeing some new things come in, new technologies coming in. And what really excites me about software development and software developers is that we're all in positions where we're really connected to the world. We're really connected to new emerging technologies. So we have more chance than a lot of people of seeing these things emerge and making a noise about them and celebrating them when they work. That means battery technologies. It means new ways of generating power. It means people finding ways to work and to exist that generate less waste. It means calling out remote working tools so we don't have to fly and drive as much. Everything that we can do like that makes so much of a difference. So if I can end on a happy note and a bit of a challenge to everybody out there, make a noise about it, but also make a noise about all the cool things that you're seeing that could really help with this. We are capable of enormous ingenuity and invention, and the stuff is out there. And if you do come up with an idea yourself, try it. You never know.
So thank you for this interview, Liz, and great work. Continue doing the great work, and see you later.
Thank you very much for having me.
Coming next.
Do you remember the biggest challenges you had in the first days when you took over as Scrum Master, besides understanding the language?
Yeah, well, I think we were in a transition period because you were Scrum Master and I had to take on some ceremonies in the time that you acted as a Scrum Master.
Yes.
So yeah, that was very challenging to take on the ceremonies. Because I wasn't with them every day, but I was learning and I had to step in.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if I handled them okay, but I mean, I'm here also after a year almost, so it's okay.
Yeah.
I think.